Stephanie White's vision for the Indiana Fever was clear from the start: establish a team that lives and dies by its defense. That vision hardened into culture with the arrival of Brienne January, one of the WNBA's most feared defenders. But this defensive DNA collided head-on with Caitlin Clark's improvisational genius. Fresh off her Iowa career, where her instinctive playmaking redefined modern offense, Clark was suddenly thrust into a system demanding rigid rotations, constant pressure, and grueling slide drills, techniques designed for players with very different. If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe. The tension wasn't just stylistic, it was biomechanical. Her body broke down within weeks, plagued by soft tissue injuries and cognitive fatigue. When Clark half-joked about poor kids enduring endless defensive slides, it wasn't just sarcasm. It was a coded critique of a system that never fit her in the first place. The riff wasn't about effort or ego. It was about survival. As the Fever doubled down on a system built for defensive grit, Clark was left straining to translate her spatial mastery into a playbook that didn't make space for it. Her league-leading turnovers weren't simply the result of poor decisions. They were a red flag of cognitive overload, of a player pulled in too many directions. Behind the scenes, the team's refusal to adapt came to represent something deeper, a philosophical standoff between institutional identity and individual brilliance. Clark's game has always thrived on timing and feel, not force and constraint. And that dissonance, played out through injuries, offhand remarks, and dwindling production, set the stage for an inevitable reckoning. You don't just fire your head coach after one season unless something behind the scenes has completely broken down. But that's exactly what just happened in Indiana. Stephanie White is out, and even though the franchise won't admit it out loud, everyone knows why. This wasn't just a coaching change, it was a philosophical rejection, a full-blown identity crisis. And at the center of it all, Caitlin Clark. Now, let's be clear. No, Caitlin didn't literally fire her. She doesn't have that kind of power on paper. But when your franchise player is one of the most transcendent offensive talents basketball has ever seen, when your entire brand, media visibility, and ticket sales revolve around her, and she's clashing with the foundational system you're trying to build, something's got to give. And it just did. What makes this so wild is that the red flags were there from the jump. Caitlin Clark didn't come into the WNBA like your average rookie. She came in as a cultural moment, a walking headline, a ratings magnet. And yet, instead of building around her strengths, the Fever tried to shove her into a system that couldn't have been more opposite to what made her special. Stephanie White and the Indiana Fever weren't subtle about their priorities. They made defense the mission. Full stop. They brought in Brienne January, 7-time all-defensive selection, to reinforce it. Every message from the coaching staff, every media appearance, every quote coming out of that building was about accountability, structure, and discipline. This wasn't just a strategy. It was an ideology. But that ideology clashed hard with reality, because Clark's offensive genius doesn't live in structure. It thrives in chaos. Her basketball IQ is so absurdly high that she can see things happening before they unfold. The way she manipulates spacing, delays her movement just enough to bait defenders, or uses their aggression to create accidental screens. It's not something you draw up in a playbook. It's instinct. It's improvisation. And the Fever, they tried to rein that in. That's the part that never made sense. Clark didn't come from a rigid system at Iowa. She came from a read and react offense designed around her ability to read the game in real time. She was free to orchestrate, improvise, and run wild with spacing and timing. She was built to break defenses, not conform to them. And so, the Fever's insistence on running a defense-first, high-discipline system did more than just mismatch philosophies. It put Clark's body on the line. The injuries came fast. Soft tissue damage. Missed games. Only 13 appearances in the 2025 season. For someone with her durability history, that was a serious red flag. And when you zoom out, the picture becomes clear. You can't ask someone to carry your offense and perform relentless, high-intensity defensive rotations without a serious ramp-up process. That's not just a workload problem. It's a biomechanical setup for disaster. Clark's body wasn't conditioned for this kind of demand. Not right away. Not without time. And the Fever didn't adjust. They didn't tailor. They didn't individualize. They just handed her the same playbook as everyone else and expected her to survive it. And if the injuries weren't enough of a warning sign, the turnovers were. Clark led the league in them. But this wasn't just a sloppiness issue. Analysts pointed out that her sky-high turnover rate was a symptom of cognitive overload. She wasn't just trying to find open teammates and manage tempo. She was trying to juggle defensive assignments, rotations, communication cues, and mental fatigue on top of it. Even the smartest player on the court has limits when the system demands everything all the time. She even joked about it on social media. A throwaway line about poor kids doing endless defensive slides might have sounded lighthearted, but let's be honest, it was pointed. That's not just banter. That's a subtle dig at a system that doesn't make space for different skill sets. Clark wasn't dragging her teammates. She was questioning why the regimen was so intense, so rigid, so one-size-fits-all, especially when it clearly wasn't working for everyone. And it's not like she had a game to fall back on. Thanks to the WNBA's stalled CBA negotiations, Clark was locked out for 7 months. No games, no court, just vibes and branding. So what did she do? She kept herself in the conversation, shouted out Indiana football, gave love to Chicago Bears, referenced players and outcomes like she'd grown up there. And maybe on the surface, that looks like a rookie trying to be a good sport. But dig a little deeper, and it reads like someone carefully constructing her belonging. Clark knew she couldn't showcase her talent, so she leaned into her public persona, embedding herself in the Indiana sports culture in a way that said, I am this city, in a league where visibility matters more than ever. That kind of identity building isn't accidental. It's survival. It's power. And it probably didn't hurt that it kept the attention off the awkward on-court dynamics and the ever-widening gap between her and the system she was expected to thrive in. And that's really the crux of the problem. The Fever had committed. They'd made defense their entire brand. Brienne January wasn't just an assistant coach. She was the embodiment of the Fever's ethos. Pulling back on that now would mean unraveling everything they claimed to stand for. But holding the line meant risking everything else. Clark's health, her performance, her trust, the public perception, the investment they were boxed in. Either bend the system around Caitlin or watch the entire thing implode. They chose, and now Stephanie White's gone. Was it the right move? Depends on who you ask. From a cultural standpoint, it's messy. It undermines a year of messaging, alienates defensive purists, and throws a wrench into any sense of organizational consistency. But from a basketball standpoint, it might be the only way forward. Because this isn't just about Caitlin Clark. It's about the future of the WNBA. Can the league accommodate a talent so singular that she defies traditional systems? Can it evolve to support star power without losing its identity? And maybe most importantly, can it keep its players healthy when the demands exceed the human limits of time, space, and muscle? Soft tissue injuries aren't just bad luck. They happen when the workload doesn't match the preparation. And when Clark was suddenly expected to move, rotate, and engage at defensive levels she hadn't trained for, while still running the entire offense. Yeah, something was going to break. And it did. There's a reason elite athletes train specifically for the roles they play. Not everyone should be doing the same drills, the same intensity, the same reps. Especially not players like Clark, whose game isn't built on brute force, but on timing, spacing, and efficiency. You don't make a violinist join the drum line, and you don't ask a once-in-a-generation offensive engine to become your lockdown wing defender overnight. The Fever system didn't fail because defense doesn't matter. It failed because it refused to adapt. And Clark? She didn't rebel. She played along. She worked. She posted. She bought into the culture as much as she could. But the misalignment was always there. And eventually, it became too obvious to ignore. So now we're here. The Fever have ripped the Band-Aid off. And whether or not they'll admit it in the press release, everyone knows this was about one thing. Building around Caitlin Clark, not around philosophy that keeps breaking her down. The question is, what comes next? Will the Fever find a coach who understands how to teach defense through offensive principles? Someone who doesn't see discipline and freedom as opposites, but as part of the same conversation? Will they find a system that supports Clark's genius without running her into the ground? Because make no mistake, this was a warning shot for the whole league. You can't have it both ways. You can't sell the spectacle of stardom and then box it into a one-size-fits-all system. You can't elevate players like Clark to the face of your sport and then ask them to conform to structures designed for someone else. Something's got to give, and it just did. Drop a comment. Was this the right move by the Fever, or is this just setting up more drama down the road? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the chaos behind the curtain. And now that the Fever have pulled the trigger, they're standing at a crossroads with no clear map. You don't just fire your head coach, dismantle your entire defensive ideology, and expect everything to magically click into place next season. This move is a declaration, a bet that Caitlin Clark's vision of basketball is not just valid, but superior, that you don't build systems to contain her, you build systems that orbit her. And that's a bold move for a franchise that spent the last several years trying to claw its way out of irrelevance. Let's be real. The Fever didn't draft Clark just for her basketball skills. They drafted a marketing machine, a media storm, a household name. She wasn't just a top pick. She was the pick. The kind of player who sells out arenas, drives up TV ratings, and becomes a brand ambassador before she ever touches a WNBA court. So why on earth would you bring in a coaching staff that doesn't understand how to unlock that? From the moment she got to Indiana, the philosophy was out of sync. The Fever weren't looking for creative freedom. They were looking for structure, for buy-in, for grit. It was as if they were trying to prove a point. That no one, not even Caitlin Clark, was above the system. But when your system sidelines your star for most of the season, leads the league in turnovers, and still doesn't win games, that point starts to look like a stubborn refusal to evolve. And the irony? This isn't even about Clark refusing to play defense. She's not ducking responsibility. She's never been afraid of work. What she's pushing back on is overload. On a system that demanded full-throttle intensity on both ends of floor with no room to breathe, no margin for adaptation, and zero individualization. It's not sustainable. Not physically, not mentally, and not strategically. Because if we're being honest, this wasn't just a breakdown in communication. It was a failure of imagination. A failure to reimagine what women's basketball could look like when you center around a player who doesn't fit the mold. Caitlin Clark is not a plug-and-play point guard. She's not a 3-and-D specialist. She's not a role player who can be shaped by your system. She is a system. And when you try to mold her into something smaller, something more palatable, you're not just limiting her, you're diminishing the product on the floor. The turnover narrative proves it. When Clark was forced to run set plays she didn't believe in, to make reads she didn't trust, and to push tempo in a scheme that didn't match her vision, the errors piled up. But not because she wasn't capable, because she was trying to force her genius into a box built for someone else. It's not that she can't play defense. It's that she shouldn't have to do everything at once. And yet, instead of adapting to her, the Fever doubled down. They framed the season around discipline, accountability, culture, words that sound good in interviews but mean nothing if they don't translate to wins or player health. What they missed was nuance. Because this wasn't a story of a spoiled rookie clashing with a tough coach. This was a story of a generational talent being thrown into a system that didn't recognize the complexity of her skill set or the consequences of mishandling it. And Clark? She didn't lash out. She didn't throw tantrums or give passive-aggressive interviews. She played the long game. She stayed engaged online, aligning herself with Indiana's broader sports culture, building goodwill, keeping her name in circulation during a lockout that should have buried her momentum. While the team struggled to find its identity, she quietly built one for herself. And if you think that kind of calculated visibility was intentional, you're missing the bigger picture. Clark isn't just navigating a new team. She's navigating a league in transition. A league where CBA negotiations are stalled, labor dynamics are tense, and institutional support is inconsistent. In that context, staying relevant without playing is more than savvy. It's survival. which makes the coaching decision feel even bigger. Because this wasn't just about basketball. It was a referendum on what kind of league the WNBA wants to be. Will it cling to traditional structures, enforcing rigid systems in the name of parity and principle? Or will it embrace the chaos, build around stars, and risk structural inconsistency for the sake of brilliance? Because Clark is a test case. If the league can't figure out how to make space for her style of play, if it insists on fitting her into boxes that don't suit her, it's going to alienate not just her, but an entire generation of players and fans who see the game differently. The firing of Stephanie White might have been framed as a coaching issue, but it was a strategic reset. A quiet admission that the Fever's direction wasn't working. Not for the fans, not for franchise, and certainly not for the player they built their future around. But let's not pretend this resolves everything. If anything, the hard part starts now. Because the Fever can't afford to get this next move wrong. They can't swing too far in the other direction and let Clark run wild with no structure at all. That's not what she needs either. What she needs is a system that understands her, one that uses defensive principles not as a blunt instrument, but as a way to complement her instincts, one that teaches through her strengths, not in spite of them. That means smarter integration, using ball screen coverage to teach rotations, embedding help-side awareness into offensive actions, building a model that's fluid, contextual, and designed for a player who processes a game like a chess engine, not a script reader. That's a tall order. Not every coach is equipped for that kind of nuance. Not every front office is brave enough to admit they were wrong and pivot with clarity. And not every player can navigate that kind of institutional pressure without burning out. But Clark? She's already done the hardest part. She's stayed professional. She's stayed engaged. And she's forced the organization to meet her halfway. Not with ultimatums, but with undeniable evidence. When your star can't stay healthy, your system doesn't win, and your fans are frustrated. You have to make a move. And now that the move's been made, the spotlight is back where it's always been, on Caitlin Clark. But this time, the story isn't about her turnovers, or her injuries, or her social media posts. It's about what happens when a franchise finally admits that the old way doesn't work for a player this new. This isn't just a roster shakeup. It's a test for the entire league. Can the WNBA evolve? Can it embrace a player who operates outside the box and build a system that supports, not stifles, her style? Because if it can't, the league won't just risk losing games. It'll risk wasting one of the most revolutionary talents it's ever seen. The Fever bet big on Caitlin Clark. Now, they have to prove they're willing to build around her, not just brand around her. There's a reason this whole situation feels bigger than just a WNBA team making a mid-season adjustment, because it is bigger. What's happening with Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever is the tip of the spear in a larger reckoning. What happens when modern talent crashes headfirst into institutional rigidity? For the past few years, the WNBA has been pushing to expand its reach, grow its audience, and elevate its stars. And Caitlin Clark is the dream scenario for that mission. She brings in new fans, casual viewers, sponsors, media coverage, you name it. She's a rare athlete who moves culture, not just numbers on a scoreboard. But you can't crown someone the future of your league and then mismatch their entire development environment. The Fever brought her in like a savior and then set her up in a system designed for someone else. It's like drafting a world-class pianist and handing them drumsticks, and then being shocked when the music doesn't sound right. From a franchise standpoint, it's a case study in organizational misalignment. Every move the Fever made pointed toward building a defense-first identity, right down to hiring Brianne January, who lives and breathes defensive culture. They put in the work, they sold a message, and fans bought in until the losses started piling up and Clark started limping through the season with injury after injury. You can only sell culture for so long when your generational number one pick plays just 13 games and leads the league in turnovers. And yet, somehow, Clark's body language never turned sour. She joked on social media, stayed engaged with fans, propped up her teammates, even promoted local football and Chicago Bears like she was a longtime resident. That wasn't just brand building. That was strategy. It kept her visible, likable, untouchable. So when the system cracked and people started asking hard questions, Why is she getting hurt so much? Why is she turning the ball over at this rate? Why doesn't she look like herself? The blame didn't land on her. It landed on the structure around her, the messaging, the over-reliance on one-size-fits-all conditioning, the resistance to building a hybrid model that meets players where they are. Because here's the truth they didn't want to admit. Not every player needs to be built the same way. Clark's game doesn't need to be shoehorned into rigid schemes that reward mechanical repetition. She doesn't need to run drills until her hamstrings give out just to prove she can play help-side defense. She needs a program that flows with her instincts, that sharpens her feel, that enhances her natural gifts without grinding them into the ground. That's not a lack of discipline. That's modern development. And it's going to be fascinating to see where the Fever go next. Do they find a coach who understands nuance? Who can translate structure without stifling creativity? Who sees defense not as a wall to build, but a language to teach through offense? Or do they fall back into old patterns? New coach, same rigidity, different excuses? Because make no mistake, Clark isn't going to wait around forever while her prime is eaten up by organizational trial and error. The Fever just sent a very loud signal that they're willing to reset everything to get this right. Now they have to prove they're actually capable of doing it. You don't get many chances to reset a franchise around a player like this. And now that the first chapter has ended, with injuries, turnover drama, philosophical misalignment, and one fired head coach, the clock starts on Chapter 2. This time, there are no excuses. You center the system around her. You protect her body. You unleash her mind. Or you risk becoming the cautionary tale everyone else learns from. If you're still with us, hit that like button. Share this with someone who's been following the Caitlin Clark saga. And tell us in the comments, who should the Fever hire next? And how do you build a system around a star this unique? Subscribe for more stories from the messy intersection of talent, ego, and the systems that can't keep up.